Hello, everyone, and welcome to Dr. Deep State. We have a special show this evening. The title of it is Reality, Holiness, and Spiritual Combat with my very good friend, Aaron. He is from Epiphany Parish in Tampa, Florida. And how are you doing today, Aaron?
Doing very good. Very good. It's Friday.
Excellent. Excellent. So here's the deal. We have been talking about this. He's actually not alone. He's representing his posse over there at the parish. So today he'll be one of the spokespeople for this topic. And we're thinking of developing this and doing it as a regular thing on Friday evenings, and possibly even opening the topic up for super chat, so we can have on Dr. Deep State a little more communication with some of our followers. So do you want to lay some of this out? What are we thinking here, Aaron?
Well, I think the genesis of this conversation started when we had the whole group together, and we went over a bunch of different things, and it just kind of, I don't think it was necessarily unwieldy, but I think we hit some high points that we just want to come back and start focusing more on. Because one of the reason that you and I connected was because as our group down here found you, and what it is just a group of guys and gals from the parish who have just sort of found each other within the Epiphany. Is a traditional Latin Mass community. It's a diocesan parish. It's not SSPX or any other TLM society. But it is a fully traditional Latin Mass parish. And so I don't know how much of that we should go into necessarily just out of interest, but essentially the parish exploded during the COVID nonsense, and has ever since then been growing, and it's probably the first or second, goes back and forth as one of the most productive parishes within the diocese. So, and I think one of the big things that you find there in that community is that everyone there has sort of realized that the truth or reality has been damaged in some way. And there's been an infiltration in the church. There's been an infiltration into the government. There's been all of this false reality that's come out. And so there's been so kind of a natural gathering of truth seekers that have come together. So you get the whole gauntlet of people there. But our little gaggle of about, I think we had about 32 people that stay in regular communication and share different ideas and information. But it all comes back to the central question is about how best to get to heaven, right? It's and then in finding you, one of the things that was the benefit for us is how you've tied so many of these dots together, because you have all these disparate rabbit holes out there that you can go down, and they themselves can be distractions. But you've connected them all in such a way that it's added, kind of given a face to the strategy that's going on behind the scenes, which we always say, well, it's Satan, right? It's demonic. But how is he working? Who is he working through? In what way is he trying to corrupt us? And how do you best defend against this? So that's why I think a lot of this matters, because if you don't realize the threat, then how are you going to prepare against it? And especially if you buy into, like you call them, the mind viruses, that somehow or another you believe something is true that is demonstrably false, and you don't believe your senses in looking at them because some authority figure that you already shouldn't trust because they've already demonstrated that you can't trust them, is telling you that this thing that's observably false is true. It's like, no, it's not. It's not true. I'm not crazy. You're crazy, right? So that's where we found you. And then this conversation, as we started kind of going through that journey, this talk is really more about a lay person's distillation of the brutal struggle that deals with becoming holy, becoming detached from the world. And so as my mind, you'd mentioned before, I was in the military, retired from the military. And so there's an element of that you try to categorize things, you try to systematize them so that you can figure out how to deal with a particular problem set and how to organize against it. So in doing that, and the information that the perspective, I should say, that you've provided, and other great talks by, specifically like people like Father Ripperger, well, without going through the whole gauntlet of minds out there, but there's so many people out there that are talking about this, but so you end up going, well, then what do we do? What do we do?
Yeah. Wow. So yeah, and we've been talking back and forth, and Aaron's picked up kind of systematic way of approaching this. And he said on our last talk, when we were talking to other members from the parish, this is all, about working through our spiritual destinations for all of us, and dealing with this idea of reality and delusion, cutting through all of this stuff in the age of delusions. And one of the things you said was, just to get started, you really have to work through your vices to take it to that next level. And what I'm thinking, we talked about it. Neither one of us has been choir boys throughout our lives. So when we're going through some of the deep battles that we personally have been through, and other people that you'll probably be bringing on here from time to time, other people watching this, I'm sure, struggle being. We all have to navigate this fallen state that we live in. So that's our goal here, is to work through our spiritual journeys and maybe share some of this information or some of our struggles, and especially some of the things that are successful and that work. So that, I think, is broadly where we're going. And Aaron was just big on always bringing this back to this idea that we're living, especially in an age of particularly deforming reality. It's like a process of being deformed all the time. And that a lot of this stuff, or these attachments that we have, I don't think we're aware of. I think that they're baked into a classical liberalism, and there's a sort of biopolitical or an engineering that goes on, or Kabbalistic magic, if you want to get weird. And so sometimes it is just identifying these things that we don't even know are attachments, until we really detach and sort of see a new sense of liberation or deliverance from some of the ties that bind us to this worldly system that we've been kind of told all along. Well, this is just how it is. This is just you gotta choose the left or the right. You have to play. And it's like, sometimes I think we've crossed. For all you there, what's going on this week. I'll get to it in the middle of the week, okay? All the drama. But we've crossed into a new era, I think, where there's a sense of illumination, that it's kind of harder to plead ignorance. So these things are out there. If you want to continue on things that are comfortable, it's the time where I think you have to make some hard decisions for people out there, that we've had these attachments, we've bought into some lies. So once you've exposed them, what do you do with that? So I think part of it is how you open this up today. We're all trying to get to heaven, and I think the best instrument far and away ever was the church that Christ started. So we always have that as a foundation to work from. What do you have as far as just some real broad outlines for us today?
Well, I think that's probably a good, kind of a caveat to start with. We're coming to this through a Catholic perspective, and not everybody who is watching is Catholic. So, and maybe even anti-Catholic. That's how I used to be. I was an anti-Catholic. So I would just ask, as we talk through these things, if they're watching your channel, then they are aware that there have been enormous lies that have been told throughout history, and especially in these days. Um, so I would ask that, as you're listening to some of these things, humbly, ask, do I fully understand what the Catholic Church actually teaches? Bishop Fulton Sheen said there's millions of people that hate what they think the Catholic Church is, but not 100 who hate what she actually is. So when I'm talking to people who aren't Catholic, there's such a disconnect between what the Catholic Church is and what they think the Catholic Church is, and part of this mind virus that what this alternate reality that we've been pushed into builds this paradigm in our head. So it's very hard to see things that are different from our perspective, but that doesn't mean that our perspective is correct. And that's something that we have to be open to when we're exposed to some of these, very hard truths to swallow. The 9/11 pill was a very difficult one for me to deal with. I was there from the literal very beginning, and the questions were all there from the very beginning, but we were too busy fighting to worry about it. So that's just one, and think of all the others. So I would just say that, as we talk through these things, say, well, that's not true. That's not how the spiritual world works. That's not how religion works. That's not what the Bible says. Well, keep in mind that the Bible is a book. It's a divinely inspired book. No word of error is in it, and it cannot be wrong, but the interpretation can. So as Catholics, we read scripture through the tradition of the church, and it's not, and that's a big word to understand. So as we start going through these things, the things that I'm telling you are not things that I believe. Now, if I broach on a subject where it's my interpretation or my view or my opinion, then I'll be very clear about that, because I as a Catholic, you don't really have well, this is what I believe versus this is what you believe. No, there's the teaching of the church. And so when we're talking about this, the things that I'm talking about, I try to be very, very close, very clear on the fact that it's the perennial teaching of the church, which means it's 2,000 years old. So without getting into apologetics on the issue of the age of the church and who established it, to look into it. If something here challenges you, then go try to prove it wrong. But with that said, so yeah, we are going to go through this in a Catholic way. So I think one of the biggest challenges for people, and I think so we'll just kind of jump into it, is when you're in any kind of a spiritual battle, when you're trying to understand things, the Catholic Church understands sin to be mortal and venial. Mortal sin cuts you off from divine grace, and venial sin doesn't, but it's still damaging. So we still have to get to the root of this. When we're meditating and reflecting on these things, it's like, well, what is sin? Okay, well, take time to think about that. What is it? How does it affect God? How does it affect our relationship with God? What does it actually do to him? And again, that's probably more of another subject, maybe another topic too, for when we have other talks. But the important thing to remember is that if you're going to enter into this battle for reality, there's basically four areas that you go through as you go through this journey to try to get to this higher level of holiness. And the key thing to remember is that you're either moving forward in holiness or you are going backwards. There's no stationary position in holiness. You're either growing or you're being destroyed. And it's the same thing with this battle against Satan. You're either advancing on the enemy or he is advancing on you. There's no lull in the battle. But sometimes we think, well, our life is going good. Maybe it's not so bad. No, No, he's winning in so many ways. So let me go over the first four, and then I'll go into the demonic aspect of this. And again, this is the demonic, not from Aaron's perspective, but from the teaching of the church, the tradition of the church. So the first is that to enter into this, one has to recognize there's a thing called habitual mortal sin. Habitual mortal sin normally is associated with addictions, but it can also be associated with habits because they can be very benign, especially in today's culture. When you watch a movie, they use the Lord's name in vain as an adjective, as a it comes into the language with ease. But every time you do that, that is a mortal sin. You miss mass on Sunday, that's a mortal sin. Willful ignorance does not excuse us from not knowing what we should be doing. And so, I mean, some people might argue with me on that, even from the Catholic perspective, because there's such ignorance in the church right now. But would you rather be wrong about that or right about it? It's like, don't take your chances. So this thing with habitual mortal sin is that when we look at our prayer life, let me just say out the four first. It's habitual mortal sin, followed by mortal sin, followed by habitual venial sin, followed by attachments. So we look at these four things. If we have habitual mortal sin in our lives, everything about our efforts, our prayer efforts, our devotions, our fasting, whatever it is that we're doing in our prayer life should be geared towards breaking those habitual mortal sins. I went through a pretty long bout with a severe attachment to alcohol. It was just a part of life in the military. And my grandfather used to say that whatever you do in your off time when you're working is what you're going to do more of when you retire. And that's what I did in my off time. And sure enough, when I retired, I did it. Never had a problem drinking. It was always stopping drinking. And eventually I got to this place where I was like, I can't pray drunk. I can't pray hungover, So I was like, this is ridiculous. What am I doing here? So you go through those steps of recognizing that, no, this is an attachment that's defining my life. So as more and more of my prayer life was directed towards that attachment to alcohol, because I don't even like to say addictions. Addiction is more of a broad term, but that, like it defined me, how I entertained, how I associated, my social life, everything. So as my prayer life became more and more directed towards that, as my eyes focused more on my relationship with God, eventually I got to the point where I was ready to let it go, ready to give it to God. And you hear this, you hear it even in the Protestant world, because my whole family's Protestant. There's so many of them that have dealt with things in the same way. So this is not unique to Catholic. This is how the divine world works, right? So one day, said my prayers, went through an exorcism prayer in the deliverance book by Father Ripperger, because my family was Masons. And so I did the exorcism prayer for Freemasonry. And I quit drinking on my own on a Tuesday. On Ash Wednesday, that's the book. On Ash Wednesday, I said those prayers that morning, went to confession, had mass, and I never took a drink again. Never wanted to drink again. I could go to the Jack Daniel's distillery and I'd be fine. So he took that away. And then since that moment when I was able to break, give that over to God and break that habitual sin, everything about my relationship with God, everything about things that I was able to understand, the mind gets clear. Sin makes us stupid. Mortal sin makes us completely ignorant. You just can't see things. So the key point is that if someone is dealing with habitual mortal sin, that's your entire direction in life, is to deal with that. There's no reason to try to go out here and do other stuff, your volunteer work and everything that you're trying to do to whatever. It has to be in this realm of breaking that habitual mortal sin. I think the key point here too is to understand that because we'll go back and forth on the spiritual combat piece too, as far as conversation, is that when we commit a mortal sin, there's a lack of urgency, especially within the church right now with mortal sin. Just look up confession times at your local parish. Just go through them. You might see twice a week, normally 45 minutes on Saturday morning, 45 minutes Saturday night, or by appointment, which is great. Just schedule it. But there's multiple masses. So there's just not this focus on the effects of mortal sin, how it has, what it does to God, what it does to us, and what it does for the enemy. Because when we commit a mortal sin, it doesn't necessarily, it kills us. It kills our soul. We are now in a state separated from God, that if we die, that objectively we have chosen hell, right? We said, I want this more than God. But we don't die, just simply die in our spiritual life. We are now working for the other side. Because if we look at it from the perspective of a spiritual battle, like if someone is killed on the battlefield, they're no longer part of the fight, right? But in the spiritual combat, take numbers, for instance. You've got 1 million on this side and 1 million on that side. If you lose 500,000 over here to mortal sin, those 500,000 are now on the other side. And that now you've got 500,000 over here whose prayers are not aided by those people who were there before, because we're all connected in this battle, because sin is not something that just happens personally in your own bedroom. It affects everything. So we have to understand that mortal sin is just not, it's not something that we can just sort of think about. It has to define our daily activity about where we're going and what we're doing. Because if you're doing it, if you're controlled by it, then you can't progress. You can't move to the next level of anything in life. You might have great success. You've got a president who's a professed Catholic who is in an objective state of public mortal sin. Great success, but pray for his soul, right?
Yeah, I think some people would say, "Oh, this just seems so heavy," and you're just, like this sounds like the church lady, and just, well, we're talking about liberation here ultimately and freedom. And one of my efforts here on Dr. Deep State is to try to be a little more diplomatic to Protestants, and my family's all Protestant, and so I grew up Lutheran and was agnostic or culturally Christian, or however you want to call it, most of my life. When I did kind of open my eyes, like, what do Catholics actually believe? Because again, I was in an echo chamber, right? It's a different paradigm. But what I liked, the first time I clicked on it, it's like it's a Catholic apologist. He explained the whole paradigm in just seconds, and it just clicked. I mean, Father, Son, love, and that's the anthropology. It's based on love and our connection to the Creator. But what I liked it is we have a name, a telos, and you don't hear this in Protestant circles. Our goal is to be saints, and it just clicked. That's what I want. That's because I'm goal orientated, and it's always so subjective in Protestantism, and there's a million variations in there. But unfortunately, Protestantism starts on this heresy of Martin Luther, which is forensic justification. That hey, you're just a dung, and you got snow over you, and God's just gonna look at you through his Jesus glasses, and none of that's in the Bible. Really, you have to really bend to kind of see that idea. It had never been discussed before in 1,500 years. But the idea is sin itself becomes very subjective, and it can be so subjective that love God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And that leads to a lot of subjectivity. At least we know, when we go into the confessional, we can bear that out in the 10 Commandments, and that every one of those sins is a sin against God. Are we loving him with all of our might? And are we loving our neighbors as ourselves? But what I liked about the idea of the sainthood, and somebody gave me this book right here. I think, it's been said a lot of times, a lot of Catholics, what do they they shoot for purgatory, and they might just miss the mark. And I really do think you have to shoot for sainthood, and that would be your last resort, is that you'd end up in purgatory. And when you read that book, there's different levels of purgatory, and some of them are pretty hellish, places you don't want to be. So anyway, I really liked that about it. But one of the things, again, not only the forensic justification that Martin Luther established, but sola scriptura and sola fide, and the idea that we need just faith alone is a contradiction. It's a direct contradiction because, of course, famously, it's right there in Scripture and in James, we need faith and works. And once you start doing that, you are in a dialectic. So Protestantism is based on a dialectic. The one revolution held by the Catholic faith has been steered horizontally, and it's a big problem. So that's one of the things I think in terms of our conversation, all the things you said, we have 2,000 years, and especially the lives of the saints to draw from. So I was going to say something else, but yeah, even the topic of this. Oh, the last thing I wanted to say, faith and works. Well, the word works sounds like it's a drag and sin and venial sin and having to go each week. And that's the system that Jesus gave for us. And he gave it for us because he wants us to be liberated from this state. And so we also have to be accountable. And sometimes when it's all left to ourselves, we just kind of sweep it under the carpet. So each week we have to be accountable if we're going to approach the Eucharist and our own state. But I think anybody that's been through this journey, once you shed some of the major sins in your life, and you get to the point that you don't want those things anymore. They're not these, they're not those things. It's like, I want God over this. And that's the ultimate liberation that we can get to. And as far as the topic for this show, I do think a lot of the enemy has been very subtle in how he works these contradictions into the very fabric of our social structure. And so when we think of what worldliness is and being attracted to worldliness, I think we sometimes really have to do another level of examination to see how so many of these venial sins can add up and weigh us down. But I'm going to throw it back to you, Aaron.
Well, I think, prayer is a work, faith in itself is a work. And I think that there's always a bad rap that's given to that because we think they think work is volunteering at the soup kitchen, or, fasting is a work. Christ himself said some demons can only be cast out through prayer and fasting, so the work is the divine work, and it's the work of opening ourselves up for grace, and then if you put yourself in the right place, God can do things. If you don't do the work of putting yourself in the right place, you can't. Just also, mortal sins are, there's the 10 Commandments, and kind of going back and again, trying not to make this apologetic because there's so many, veins we can go down, and there's so many people out there talking about this stuff anyway that you can find much better, more educated sources on delving into these various topics. But when you're looking at something where you open your scriptures and you say, well, okay, it says, remember the Sabbath and keep it holy. Well, what does that actually entail? It doesn't say, it doesn't, so what does that mean? Each person gets to define that. How do you know if you're right? I mean, there are answers out there that Protestants give on that, but they and I've had these conversations 1,000 times, but they tend to be circular, and they always turn into what about, down the road, what about this? Okay, well, let's just focus on this one topic and see where it takes us. So for this conversation, where the Catholic teaching is that when you violate the 10 Commandments, you're committing a mortal sin, and there's room in there for interpretation as far as, well, not room in there for interpretation, but there, mortal sin has to be, you have to know that it's a mortal sin, uh, be able to resist it, but then still go and do it. It's like and you don't just, mortal sin is not one of those things you just accidentally fall into. You have to, if you look at murder, for instance, murder is a mortal sin. It's not the same as killing. Murder is you have to, even if it's a crime of passion, everything builds up to that point where it ends in the death of someone else. So it could have been stopped all the way back here. You had to make that willful act of moving forward, moving in the direction of mortal sin. And so then in the Ten Commandments, they're all mortal sins, but they kind of work in from the first to the last of level of gravity. And again, I don't want to go into the spirituality of that and the effects, but just safe to say that if you have any other God besides God, the first commandment, then, is there, do any of the others matter, because you can't do anything worse than that, really. To the
Yeah, if
person.
I could jump in there, the idols have always been there, right? But the modern world distorts the image of God that's been impressed upon us in so many ways. In one of my topics, as we're moving into hyper reality or artificial reality, there's so many sneaky ways these get into our lives. When we all know our attachments to celebrity, which is very problematic. And I think we can what I'd like to do is introduce ideas of how we can identify those idols in particular and move past them.
Yeah. I think that's probably one of the most difficult tasks, isn't it? I mean, it's pretty easy to say, well, my motorcycle is my idol because I spend so much time, well, kind of, but I mean, it's more of an attachment, not an idol. When you're spending day in and day out on CNN or Fox News, going after this, trying to figure out how you're going to argue with your neighbor on why Trump should be president versus, whoever's going to survive Biden. It's nonsense. You make your nation your idol. You're flying the American flag and, America first and all this other stuff, and never realizing that has become an icon in your life, that your military service, that's how I identify myself. No, it's not. That's, it's 27 years, a long time ago. Not really, but what is it, 5 years now, 6 years? 2006? Yeah, 7 years. 7 years seems a long time ago. But we have these things that we identify ourselves with something but it all feeds back to our pride. It's like, well, look what I did. Look how awesome I used to be. But what did you do today? Did you pray your rosary? No, you didn't. Oh, okay. Well, cool. I'm glad you used to do something really awesome one time. But yeah, I think I kind of went too far down the road on explaining mortal sins, but I think it's important for people to at least understand the concept. If you're Catholic, you know what it is. If you're not Catholic, look into it, understand it. So it's habitual mortal sin. All your efforts geared towards ending habitual mortal sin. And then as you break those attachments that you have, because there normally aren't a large numbers. There's normally porn, drugs, alcohol, bad language, smoking some reefer, it's, a drink, and not get drunk. When I was a kid, you could smoke weed and not get high. You just might get a little tipsy, but now you can't even touch it without getting blitzed. But and it becomes this attachment, where this is the most important thing that I do today. I'm going to do everything I can to get to that place.
Yeah, that's, what do we do like with some of these prayer and fasting? And so what we can develop is how to pray. What does that mean? Systematically thinking about prayer, systematically thinking about fasting. And one of the quick things I could throw in there, I spent years as a Protestant, and I just thought, I'm just saved, or I'm talking about Jesus, and that, and
Gotta be
that's good. That's good. With the truther stuff, boy, can that be a snare. And I don't want to sound too judgy, but I realized after a while there's a million holes. And just, I'm not watching the Netflix, but this becomes almost a platform for entertainment. So that can be a direction there that people, I think, have to be vigilant about. And I don't want to trigger anybody, but sometimes even our Christian influencer world, and dare I say, even the Catholic influencer world, sometimes can start to go round and round. And kind of at some point, we might have to say, am I spending too much time here? Maybe I could be more productive, or maybe I could be in a different spiritual mode right now.
Yeah. Well, you did on the prayer thing that we were talk about that. Okay, so fine. Stop mortal sin. Stop habitual mortal sin. Stop mortal sin. Stop habitual venial sin. Start looking at your attachments and start breaking away from those attachments. Boom. Easy day. That'll take us the rest of our lives. So the way we do that is through prayer. And one of the things that started really changing in my life, and if you talk to anyone that has progressed through the stages of holiness, you'll see them represented in different ways. The one that I personally reflect on is you go through the stage of purgation, the stage of illumination, and the stage of union. So the purgation is where you're getting rid of all of the attachments. The illumination is where you start to understand the mind of God and your relationship to Him. This is the super dumbed down version. And then the union is where you live your life as a constant prayer. We can do that. We can achieve perfection on earth. I'm not there yet. Maybe a few days I'll get there, but close, right? No. So you cannot get there without prayer. And this priest, he's a phenomenal fellow. But anyway, he says you have to pray. If you're not praying an hour throughout the day, and he was clear on that throughout the day, then how are you ever going to grow? Because you have to start developing this habit. And eventually, as you do this prayer of 1 hour throughout the day, where you structure your mind, I'm going to get this in, then prayer becomes habitual. It becomes something that just starts happening as you're doing stuff. You find yourself, instead of cursing, you're looking at opportunities where you say, well, that's an opportunity I can grow in grace, grow in virtue. So I just want to talk real quickly about the 15 minutes or the hour as far as structure is concerned. Seems daunting because most people, especially if you live in the lay world and you're in the world, don't have the ability to take an hour and break it apart or put it aside. I mean, so it's 15 minutes in 4 sections, 15 minutes for, again, we'll talk about Mary in a second, 15 minutes for the Rosary, 15 minutes for spiritual reading, which, by the way, qualifies when you're watching, listening to a sermon on YouTube or some sort of talk on a theological issue. You can do it in your car. You can spend more than 15 minutes doing that. 15 minutes of mental prayer, and then your devotionals. So again, as we kind of broke this down and started thinking about talking about it, so you can just talk about any one of these things for an hour, but how to keep it surface level. So a rosary, if you do a full rosary, the first part of the rosary, a lot of Catholics didn't. I didn't know this. The first part of the rosary at the beginning, that's a devotional prayers. The rosary consists of the mystery for the day. You pray those 5 mysteries, and then the Apostles' Creed, followed by the Our Father, 10 Hail Marys, and Glory Be. So that's it. So everything you do before that and everything after that, those are devotional prayers. So if you pray a rosary, you're almost halfway there. It takes me about 25 minutes to pray a rosary. And when I started praying the rosary, it took me about 45 minutes because my mind kept going off everywhere else. the devotions. Devotions are like today is First Friday. Tomorrow's First Saturday. If you don't know about them, look them up. Critical. The promises associated with them are too good to pass up. But I have the Saint Benedict, the devotion to Saint Benedict. So super powerful sacramental. I have the miraculous medal, and I have the brown scapula. So these are spiritual weapons that we use against Satan to defend us, to protect us. They're blessed. And as part of my prayer life, I'm devoted to those saints who introduced them to us, who God introduced them to us through them. So you have these devotional sacramentals and you have these devotional prayers. There are so many of them. Even if you're not Catholic, they're out there. You know that you can bring in as be a part of your habitual prayer life. So it's imperative that we pick up these devotionals because they're there, they're tested, they're tried, they've got so many miracles associated with them, so many changed lives associated with them, so many promises associated with them. So pick up these devotionals and pray those devotionals every day. And then mental prayer, KC he said I can't do mental prayer, so he just prays 6 hours a day, a bunch of various prayers that he works through. He's in good company, though. There's a lot of saints that had trouble with mental prayer. But just to sit and reflect on any particular item with God, where have that ability to think through what your prayer life has given you this day. It's really not hard. If you drive for more than 30 minutes a day, there's half of your time there. When you wake up in the morning, there should be prayers that come out of your mouth. Before you go to bed at night, there should be prayers that come out of your mouth. You just have to start working to structure your life around an effort to do prayer. You may not make an hour right off the bat. For a lot of people, I know it was for me, just being able to get one rosary in every day was a massive challenge. And now I can't imagine going without it. But it does happen. And then the next day I pray yesterday's rosary, and it just kind of gets out of hand. Get to the end of the day, you're exhausted and you fall asleep in the middle of it. So I think it's the key point, the key takeaway there is that if you do not have a structured prayer life, even if you can't meet a specific timeline that you're going, you're praying the Angelus or you're praying the office or whatever, monumental task you want to put yourself to, you have to make it up in your mind that mortal sin's out here waiting to grab you and take you to hell. You're not going to beat that casually. You must assault it with every ounce of your being that you can muster. The more you do it, the better you get. It's like the gym. You're not going to be the person you want to be the first day you show up at the gym. So you have to work out those spiritual muscles every day, and you will get bigger and you'll get stronger and you'll get faster the more you do it. Period.
Yeah. Two things I would throw in is, and this is what I hope when we maybe communicate more, share this more with other people. I'd hope that we can get this started on Super Chat for two reasons. One is just sharing the sense of victory when we do overcome these things in our lives. And then wanting to take that sense of fulfillment from overcoming these obstacles in our lives and taking it to the next step and the next level. And the other thing is just the whole Catholic paradigm. Protestant has brought us into this increasingly atomized view of reality, which it's just me and my computer and Jesus, me and my Bible and Jesus, which is fine. That's got a place for it, but it's not just, in our paradigm is we're entering a family, and it's a family of saints, and we're all there together, and our victories we share with the whole community on heaven and on earth. So to be able to tap into that community and learn how. And I think all of the things you've just described are part of that paradigm where we're not alone and we share in others' suffering, but we also delight in other people's victories.
Yeah, especially when you're able to look over at someone and you see how much they've advanced, and in this group that we have, I mean, you know, it's you have to also be careful because human relationships can become attachment. So as much as I love all of these people, I still have to be very careful not to make that the reason that I'm going to mass on Sunday, is to be able to spend time with these people afterwards. And that's not a hard thing to pull back from, honestly, but especially for them, because I can be very annoying. But you think about, like, the clarity that Casey, the simplification that Casey takes these difficult concepts and brings them down, and then you've got Adam over here bringing in these very complex problems and having thought through them and really, put them into a perspective where you can go, okay, I see all the sides of the argument. I can understand the problem better. And then, then you got Elizabeth, who is just this beacon of hope when it comes to when you're struggling through this spiritual journey and saying, when am I going to get it? And she's like, nope, it'll come. And you can see the fruit in all of these people and what they're doing in their lives, and we're all growing, in different directions, going the same direction, but the things that we're struggling with over here, Tim's got it figured out. Tim already did it, and he chimes in and says, well, this is how I kind of dealt with it. He was like, oh, well, that makes it super simple. So that community there, and then you mentioned the saints. When you're able to study the lives of the saints and what they've done and how they overcome, and it's like, you can only do that through supernatural. There's no way that a person, okay, what's different about them? And then you understand their lives. Well, we had a very similar experience. Wow. And you realize that God is faithful to the very end. We're the ones that are unfaithful. We're the ones that lose hope. We're the ones that lose faith that these promises are true. And every time something bad happens in our life, instead of understanding that those are an opportunity that God's given us to grow in virtue and grace, and we're like, no, we don't want that. I don't want that cross. Give me a different one that's much lighter, a little bit more comfortable, got some padding on the shoulders. That'd be much. And there's this other thing. It's like this lie that God will not give us more than we can handle. No, God, that's how He grows you. It's like you struggle against it. It's the struggle that when He brings this on you, and the reason you can't handle it is because you're trying to handle it. You're not turning to Him. He can, do everything because He's God, right? So we're just not turning to our Creator. We're turning to the creature and saying, how am I going to get through this? No, you gotta go back to the source on all of this stuff. And I think that's the thing that sorry, I'll go off on that kind of stuff. Wait till you have KC on.
Well, I'm looking
So,
forward.
yeah.
I'd like to see all of us, and we'll get the whole clan on here, and we'll have a really get going, a lot of sharing. Yeah, I'm looking forward to that.
But it comes back to this thing too, is that the importance of understanding the fight that we're in, understanding this like, you're creating a language for it, this egregore, this simulacrum, and applying words to what the problem is. And when you realize all of these things are going on around us, you have to become aware of these things so that you understand the lie that you're existing in, because those lies are preventing us from seeing clearly what God has provided all along. 2,000 years, since the new covenant that goes all the way back to Adam before that. And all of that exists in heaven, that's made it to heaven, and it's still here on earth. This communion of saints, we have access to all of this. And we just want to kind of try to do it on our own, you know? Why?
Yeah. So, yeah, one of my final ideas here, which I found over the years, one of the attachments or the egregores that I think people are waking up to, because I do think we've crossed the line right now. And I think this is part of the unveiling, is that we're seeing everything out there more clearly than ever before. And that's how God, wrote the script. And one of the things I think, and this isn't just true in America, I think around the world in our assemblies and our parliaments, is we're seeing more people perhaps than ever that's the dialectic. It's right and left. And maybe there was some value to these republics or these systems in the past. But this is what I found in my own family with people that I've tried to communicate with, the attachment to the trick of this, like, come on, he's got to be better than that guy. Conservatism. And there was a lot of good things in the idea of it, but I think we have to start kind of seeing the idea that it's, when you see what's happened, for example, how they sold us out this week, lock, stock, and barrel in every sense. And then you can see, well, they sold us out there in 2000 and pulling away from this thing called conservatism that we see as now false opposition. It's not even slowing the train down. It's they're there, and in fact, it's more than likely they'll be the one assigned or selected to the next part of this journey to really take us to a dark spot. But that's not what I'm saying right now. It's the old, what am I supposed to do? If I lose that attachment, what am I supposed to do? Wherever the world is taking us, we need to kind of clean ourselves from these attachments to get right, to face the new challenges that are coming up. That's what I believe. So that's why I think as we're sort of this illumination of consciousness, I'm not saying in the classical Catholic prophecy sense, but we're beginning a process of illumination, and some people are just scared, like, well, and what they're really saying is, who am I supposed to vote for? What do you want me to do? And when people ask that question, I found over the years, they really don't want an answer. They want an idol. And just, and it's not enough just to say, pray or read your Bible. But and so that's what we're talking about, is doing this and to preparing our minds for whatever the changes are going to be down the pike, that we're going to be more clear than when we separate from some of these bad actors I think we've attached ourselves to. And I know this kind of stuff is triggering to some people, because it's really become a self-referential celebrity culture wherever you go, including the influencer culture. So I know people are going to get touchy about some of this, but I think that's the direction we're going. Do you have any final ideas to wrap it up for today? Because my vision is we'll do this again Friday. I'm thinking right around 8:00. I'm living Central Time. I'm in Texas here. And we're probably going to have groups of people, and we'd like a sense of sharing and a sense of seeing what has worked for people, in terms of overcoming the obvious obstacles and some of the ones that are a little harder to see. What do you got for us to round some of these ideas up? Did we get through all 4 of your steps?
We talked about them, but like I said, when we went through this, it's like,
we're just laying it out here.
I think it's better to put it out there and say, this is the context and how do we work through these. And I think it'll be great to get feedback from people to kind of say, well, stop on that point and let's go over here and kind of delve into that a little bit. It's just difficult because it's such a broad topic. It's something I've been struggling with for a long time, about how do you figure out how to boil this stuff down, especially since the saints have been talking about it for 2,000 years. They've been going over this. So how do you break it down to something very, very simple and easy to digest? And, and sometimes it gets so simple that it's like, well, that can't be answered. But
some simple things they're going down this week, that I'll probably mention. It's a lot of it's right there, and the Gospel of John and the discourse with Pilate and Christ saying, I have come to bring you truth, which is really, he's brought us his mystical body that extends throughout the world. And what goes along with approaching truth. Truth can be a lot of rabbit holes and can get us lost. But I think taking our spirituality to the next level as Catholics is something we have to really take seriously at this point. Just like when God reveals the I am, you're on holy ground. It's time to take your sandals off.
Yeah, and there's also too, like for those who are not Catholic listening to this, it's like, okay, fine. What else are you going to do besides holy? What else are you going to achieve other than heaven? You know, so if you've got something that you think is more important than understanding your relationship to God, if you're in a place of status quo where you think I'm saved, I'm good, how do you know? You know, I'm not saying you can't know. I'm saying make, you know, that was your answer in a conversation you had in another one of your talks. It's like, what do we do with all this stuff? It's like personal holiness. If we pray more, if we purge our lives of these sins, these lies, these things that are taking us away from being good husbands, good fathers, good friends, good neighbors, if we work on our perfection, not worry about anyone else's, but if we work on our perfection, that's the strength that the world needs. That it needs more. That's the solution to all of our problems. And in the end, if you don't achieve heaven, none of the other nonsense matters at all.
Yeah. And I'll just expose a little something right now. And this is going to be true for everybody out there. When whatever it is in our job, our relationships, our jobs, our work, our relationships, when we choose the path of least resistance, we're going to be in a rut and unhappy. And our spiritual life is the same way. And I'll admit this right now. I kind of do the minimal sometimes with the Rosary. And so that's one of the first places I want to start, is deeper into the meditation. And that's one way I start building, is adding a decade here along with everything else. But yes, and when things get heavy out there in the world, sometimes when we want to cling back, there is a time for that. But when the things get dark and there's a temptation to kind of shut down, it's really time to get yourself up. And this is the whole theme here: spiritual combat, be at war. When you get up in the morning and you put your feet in the ground, have a warrior's mindset. And that's, I think, what Aaron's really bringing to the table here.
One thought I did have that didn't go over. I think this is important, and this will be my last thing that I'll leave. God provides us with everything we need to become saints in the station of life that we are in. And Americans have a hard time with the concept of station, because we like to think that we can become president someday, right? Well, maybe, but with God has us where He wants us right now, right? And it may really, really suck, but whatever it is about the station that we are currently in life, that station, God is providing us opportunities to grow in virtue and holiness. And so the simple formula is, and this is by another guy, he's actually not a saint, but it's an old book. We accomplish sainthood by doing our duty in accordance with our station in life with devotion. If we do our duty, but we don't devote it to God, if everything that you do, dishes, every single aspect of our lives, it's not something that you have to go over here and achieve holiness. You just do what you're supposed to do every single day. Is it a trash day? Did you take the trash out? Did your wife not do the dishes? Did your husband not, feed the dog? Then can you do it? You know, what self-sacrificial thing can I do in this moment right now? And I'm doing it out of love for God. Not because I expect something from the other person or return, but because that is my duty. Should I have an ordered life? Yes. Do I make my bed before I leave the house? Yes, because that is my duty. So whatever your duty is, it doesn't matter who the tyrant is that's over you. In fact, the worse the guy is, and the more obedient you are,
Yes.
the more holy you will become.
Yes.
So do one's duty in accord with their station in life with devotion.
Excellent. I like that. And then it's an entire integration with our lives into this process. so that we can present ourselves as a living sacrifice.
Boom.
Yeah. Let's wind it up right there. Nice seeing you.
You too?
And we're gonna do this in a week, and I'm looking forward to having us and our conversation grow each week, and we'll see where it goes. But I hope you have a great weekend, my friend Aaron.
You too. Thanks for everything you do, man.
You betcha. All right. Everybody out there, thanks for joining us for another edition of Dr. Deep State. I have a great friend from California. He's going to be talking to us a little bit about the SSPX stuff he does out there. And I have a very special guest coming up in the middle of the week, and we're going to deal with a lot of things that are going on in the world. So we're looking forward to that as well. So I hope everybody out there is doing really well. This has been Dr. Deep State.